Looking back, I mean, getting arrested was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. Had I not gotten arrested, I probably...
Alcohol recovery. We got into the gym pretty quickly. Realized he and I were definitely of the same mind about a lot of things. I knew he had the same passion for working out, for bodybuilding. We started talking about music and everything like that, and just he's come to be a very close friend. He actually lives out near me, and so I'm glad I get to see more of him nowadays. Brandon's got a crazy story, and so I just wanted him to come on here and share some of that. Definitely somebody who has found his redemption in life and is living life to the fullest these days. I'd like to welcome you, Brandon.
Thank you.
If you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, tell them about your journey, man.
Yeah, well, I'm Brandon, obviously. I've got coming up on 4 years of continuous sobriety at the end of this next month. And it took me, a lot of time to get there. I mean, multiple treatment centers, multiple times getting arrested, locked up, putting my family through hell, putting myself through hell. It was just, it was going back pretty much till my late teens, early 20s. It was just a cycle of being in and out of all different types of institutions. And let's see, I finally reached a point 4 years ago, where I ended up getting arrested. And this time, most times I got arrested, I'd, get a PR bond or bond out fairly soon with a cheap, it was pretty low cost. But initially, the first time I went to court, got no bond. That when they led me back to my cell, I kind of had a moment of reflection where I was just like, I just turned 30. I had this thought, like, I can't keep doing this for the rest of my life. Something's got to change. And so, I started praying again, and I came, I basically made a promise. I was like, if you can get me out of this, I will turn my life around. And it's, looking back, I mean, getting arrested was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. Had I not gotten arrested, I'd probably still be out there, I'd either be dead in jail or, just barely out there, barely hanging on.
Right.
So
what was your drug of choice? What were you on?
I mean, it started out, with drinking and smoking weed as a teenager. I moved on shortly thereafter, late teens, early 20s, moved on to pills. And it was just like a gradual progression of harder and harder. It went from, Vicodins and all that to Roxy's, oxycodone. And then when I couldn't get Oxy anymore, I switched over to heroin. And I was on heroin for probably solid 4 or 5 years. And it's like I was one of those functioning addicts where I could, maintain a job and maintain relationships. And for the first 2 years, no one really even knew, I was shooting up multiple times a day.
Did you jump straight in the needle, or were you snorting it first?
I mean, there was a very brief window of me snorting it, but then I talked to, certain people, and they're like, oh, you can get higher even more, if you do it this way. And, I kind of just, jumped the shark and did it. So,
yeah. Did you ever have any, speaking for me, it never, for whatever reason, it never registered in my head when I started using needles. Like, it didn't register like, oh, this is bad or anything like that. It was a very oddly natural thing. And then once you feel the first time what that feels like, you're like, oh, I've been wasting shit up to this point. Now this is how it's supposed to feel.
Yeah, it just seemed economical.
Right, right.
And get higher for longer and save more money by doing it this way. So,
right.
It wasn't, I didn't have this moment of reflection where I was like, oh my God, I'm about to start using needles. I'm going to start injecting. It was basically like, oh, let's do it. Let's see where we go from here. So. Right.
I think, regular or people that don't, aren't blessed with the disease of addiction. My drug scale, it was like, you're taught in school and everything like this, like, oh, drugs are going to kill you. This is your brain on drugs. And then, you're told by family, parents, everything that it's so bad, and then you do your first drug, whatever it is, weed, and you're like, that's it?
Yeah.
This was all the bad thing? So how can your next logical progression to the next drug, it's like, well, that wasn't that bad, let's try this.
Yep.
And it was like that for me, everyone, and nothing scratched that itch until I had finally gotten to the needle. So it perfectly progresses you to get right into that. I don't think regular people understand how easy it is to get to that because, they don't have the same genes we do or whatever it is. So you get arrested, you're in a whole bunch of trouble. Family turn their back, or?
I mean, family is pretty much just like, at a certain point, every time I got arrested, my mother I'd call her and she'd just be like, "What'd you do this time?" And I'd tell her and she's like, "Well, at least I know where you're at," And so I usually ended up, either having friends or my own money or some way to, bail myself out. But this time with the no bond, I told her and she's just like, "Well, there's nothing I can really do." She goes, "So you just need to kind of sit there and think." And that's exactly what I did. I spent a lot of time just, reflecting over the past 10, 12 years of my life and, reflecting on the people I hurt, the relationships I ruined, the jobs I threw away, all the money wasted. I mean, I took a hard look at myself. And then I was in there, Harris County Jail in Houston. It's not exactly the best place.
No. I've never been there, but I definitely heard about it.
And so I was there for 3 months. And I'd go back to court every month. And this first month I went back, I got a bond, but it was, almost $100,000. And then, I went back another month, the other month, and they lowered it again. And then at the very end, during the third month, they finally lowered it down to enough where I could, afford to pay it. But I had to give my mother power of attorney to, sign all the paperwork, get the money from the bank, and come and, pull me out. But one of the things, I was homeless. I didn't, when I got arrested, they towed my car. Car was, was going to cost way more to get out than what it was actually worth.
Right.
So I just couldn't, wrote that off as a loss. So in my, my mother told me, she says, "You can't move back here. It's just not, we're not in a place where we can, we don't want to, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't want to help you ruin yourself anymore, and by them letting me move back in, it would have been a safe spot and I would have been able to just slip right back into, what I was doing before." So right before I was getting out, she had called me and she's like, "The only way I'm going to go to the bondsman with this money is if you agree to do treatment, when you get out of here." And I said, "Okay." And by that time, 3 months in Harris County, I was like, "I'll do anything. Just come and get me out of here."
Right.
And so she's like, "All right, well, I found a place, and it's minimum 6 months." And I was like, "I don't care. I'll do anything."
Yeah.
And so I got out that night, spent the night at their house, and then early the next morning, took me to the place, and I ended up staying at this particular location for 8 months. But I mean, up to this day, I'll always credit them, with staying sober. But it's just taught me a lot of, I was humbled. Taught me a lot of humility while I was there. Taught me, patience, because, if I would have left early, I'll be right back in the same spot. So
Right.
I just had to, just ride it out and learn and absorb everything I could from where I was at to try and, set myself up for success when I got out. And, thankfully I got out. I ended up getting a job. I moved into a sober living home. They had an emphasis on working out, and I ended up getting a job right down the street at a treatment center, and it was $13 an hour. And I was just like, I'll do anything.
Right.
I had nothing. I had no money to my name. I didn't have a place to live. I didn't have a car, anything. So I was just willing to do whatever it took to climb out of the hole that I was in.
Right. Let me go back to that moment when you're on the phone with your mom and she's telling you, that she can no longer continue to contribute to your demise. That right there, that was one of my most powerful moments. When I'm locked up and my mother stopped picking up the phone, she'll no longer accept my collect calls anymore. That was the moment where I was like, I fucked up. Like, my own mother won't talk to me right now. I'd say one of the most common questions that I get from people, just everyday people that want to talk to me about this type of stuff, is that, what do I do, my son or my daughter or my husband? And it's such a hard question to answer, because obviously you're talking to a mother, she's talking about her son or her daughter. It goes against every motherly instinct in their brain, body, and soul to ever, quote unquote, turn their back on their kid. They're not actually turning their back, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right. But so I can only speak for me, but that was the moment that I needed. When that, oftentimes your mother is going to be your ride or die and that last person down for you when she turns their back, and it's like, all right, now I got nothing. I need to change. That, would you say, is that your rock bottom moment?
It's a contributing factor of, the overarching moment of my life at that point in time. It was the getting arrested. It was the not having, my parents or my mother in my corner anymore. It was having nothing to my name. It was it was a very introspective moment I had where it's like something's got to change or nothing's going to change.
Right.
So, it's like I said, getting arrested, I hated it at the time.
Yeah.
I was, in jail. You're withdrawing. You can't get any sleep. The food's terrible. But looking back, it saved my life.
Right. Dude, it's crazy how, I almost romanticized prison in my head before I had ever went.
Mm-hmm.
I want to run around and think I'm a gangster and run around in the streets. And like, I remember sitting there like, I could do time. I could do that, no problem and stuff like that. And then I started doing time and was like, what the fuck was I thinking or talking about? Like, this is not what it is right here. It's humbling is an understatement when you're in there, you hear that door close and, you realize you're on guard 24/7. You don't know what's what, who's who, or anything like that. Then all of a sudden everything starts getting real racially segregated, and you have to eat with these people and you can't talk to these people and stuff like that. And it was just like, man, I just want to do my time and get through this. It's definitely an eye-opener. You had talked about your treatment, and one of the first stories I think you and I talked about, I'll share briefly. My first time in treatment, it was the one and only time my family was willing to pay for treatment for me. And I was in Florida. I was in Miami, Florida. I ended up going to a detox in Tampa. And I remember my mother telling me, do your research, find out where you want to go to treatment, and I will send you there. And so I'm kicking dope. I'm not doing any type of research whatsoever. All I know is a couple of people in the detox were talking about where they were going to treatment at. And so they were going to some place in Louisiana. And so I'm like, all right, that's where I'm going. I want to go there. So I tell my mom, and that's where they send me, and I show up in Louisiana, no clue where I'm at, what I'm doing. And I remember showing up to this place, and there's houses, and there's a men's house, women's house, it's nice land and all that. And I just remember walking into the house, and my first couple of days, every room I went into, I saw this picture of this guy on the wall. And I was like, who is this guy on the wall? It was like he was the president or something. I'm like, who is this? And after about day 3, I remember asking somebody, who's the guy on the wall right there? And they're like, oh, that's L. Ron Hubbard. And I was like, what? Who? And they're like, oh, he's the founder of Scientology. And I was like, what the fuck's that got to do with rehab? And so here I'm in a Scientology rehab, and then I end up being in there for, a lengthy amount of time like you. And it's a funny story to me now. It's definitely one of the most wild experiences. But, I remember we had both established we were kind of in quote unquote cults at one point. And, in all honesty, like a lot of the stuff that they taught me in there was, if I would have actually listened to, wouldn't have been bad stuff. I relapsed the first day out. But what was your experience like in that treatment center and doing 8 months of treatment?
One of the biggest things I learned was patience. It was, I learned, we had these, they did this thing, it's kind of like a fire circle, and you basically sit in the middle of it, and you can't react, you can't say anything, and you have this entire crowd of people just going around and picking you apart and just breaking you down and saying, this is where you're messing up, this is what we see, and you're not allowed to argue back, you're not allowed to defend yourself anyway, you just kind of have to sit there and accept it and take it. And, the person I was before in my addiction, I'm the first one to be like, oh, fuck you, dude.
Right, yeah.
And so...
I would have been sitting there grabbing my chair, gritting my teeth, like, what?
Yeah, and so there was a lot of, moments, and they only brought up people that they thought needed to be brought up. There were some people that got maybe brought up one time in 6 months, but I got brought up almost every single week.
I bet you did.
And it was like every Monday would roll around, and I'd be like, well, this is the day they kicked me out. And, because they would kick people out in these meetings, say, all right, well, you're no good for the community, you've got to go. And for whatever reason, every week I'd get brought up, and they may kick out 2 or 3 people, but they're like, Brandon, you're staying, you need to change, you are changing, but, you need to listen to what everybody's, kind of saying. And a lot of the criticism was valid and completely, warranted. But it taught me, how to sit there and actually listen to other people's criticism of me without reacting.
Right.
And, being able to do that, translates now into my later life, whether it's in my marriage or, whether it has to do with work. I, try not to be so reactionary when it comes, or spontaneous or anything when it comes to dealing with issues in my life. And so, it was a good experience, Overall, I joke around and I talk, say some things, but, they gave me my life back.
Right.
I would not be here today if it wasn't for them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so one and done? One treatment center?
No. I went to, there's a place in Houston I had gone to. Two places in Houston I had gone to. I would have gone to a place in Corpus Christi. My parents even pulled an intervention on me. This was probably a year and a half, 2 years before I finally got arrested. They wanted to send me to a place in Amarillo. And they showed up, and, I knew something was off. I lived in an RV out in the back property, and, I was basically getting high underneath their nose, but I was still going to work, still had a job and everything. So they didn't, as long as I was just doing something, they didn't mind. But finally it kind of reached a boiling point. One more, my dad knocks on the tray and he goes, "Hey, I got donuts out in the kitchen. You want to come get some?" And at first I'm like, he's being way too nice.
Right.
But I was just like, you know what? All right, let's go. And so I walked in and I reached down to pull a donut, and right then two people came walking around the corner. They're like, "Hey, buddy."
You know what it was?
Immediately I knew exactly what it was. And so they're like, "Yeah, we've been hearing, we just want to talk to you. I hear you're not doing so good." And I was not trying to hear it at that time in my life. So, I'd gone out there to leave, and they had pre-planned everything. My dad had disconnected my car battery and taken it out, so I had no exit. And finally I was able to get a hold of one of my friends, and I was like, "Yeah, you got to come pick me up." And so I was like, "Don't even pull into the driveway." And so he did a slow roll by the house, and I just went taking off. I was locked in my car, and they're surrounding my car, kind of like, "Hey, let us help you. And I ended up, when they were distracted and kind of like formulated a game plan, I saw my buddy coming down the road, and I was just like, "Keep rolling." And so while they were all, off talking to themselves, I swung the door open and I just bolted down the road.
All right.
And then that led to another, they ended up selling the trailer, telling me I can't come home. I did end up getting my car, but past that, I was living in trap houses, crashing on friends' couches. And even then I was just like, I'm fine. I don't need help, but I was a very hard-headed, stubborn individual. Mm-hmm. I never wanted to admit that I was wrong. And by admitting that I needed to go back to rehab was me admitting that I was wrong. Mm-hmm. And I was just not a quality I had at that point in my life. So,
right. What, so through the whole journey, through everything, what, I know what your life looks like today, but what would you say, what was your defining moment? What was your moment of redemption where you're like, all right, I made it?
There's a couple of them. One of the biggest ones that stands out is, about 6 months ago, me and my wife, we just purchased both of our together first home. And that's something I never saw as something that could be in my life. Me being a homeowner, I just never thought it would be in the cards. I never thought it was something that I would be able to attain. I'd always lived in apartments or rented mm-hmm. rooms or, spent a lot of time in jails. So the fact that, I was able to purchase a home with my wife, and have my own space to live in, not shared with any roommates or anything else. I remember we just moved in that first night, and I was in the living room, my wife was over in the kitchen, and I just turned to her and I was like, "Hey, look at us."
Right.
Just look at us.
Right.
And she's like, "I know," because me and my wife, we have a similar story. I mean,
right.
Or so, it was one of those kind of pipe dreams, basically,
right.
that we never thought we would ever be able to have.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, it's a combination of, home ownership, have a relationship with my son again. I was by my own admittance, not the greatest father, I was skipping out on child support. I'd go months without seeing him, and for a child, that does a lot to them. And I realize, I've done that, and it's an ongoing process of getting that relationship back.
Right.
But it's night and day compared to where I was, 5 years ago with him.
Right. So that getting the family back, that right there is what taught me patience. Mm-hmm. Because, we're addicts. We need immediate gratification. We want it now. And I know I'm doing well, but getting the understanding that the families, they've heard all our shit before, dude. They've heard every story under the sun. It's going to be different this time. I'm doing well. And they're just kind of sitting back waiting for the next, shooter drop. And, you know what I mean? So it just takes that patience and consistency. It's what I talk with people about it all the time. And that right there is what taught me patience.
there was this one small moment I will say about also thinking like, okay, I've done this, but it was probably about a year and a half after I'd gotten sober. I'd gone home to my parents' house for Christmas, and there was the first time in probably the last half decade that I was able to walk in to their kitchen, and they have like a little sidebar area, and they had bottles of liquor and everything still sitting out. They used to, when I would come over, locked it up. They put it behind lock and key. They hid it. But, I'd walked over there, and I was just like, what's all this doing out? And they're like, well, but my parents had told me, they're like, we finally trust you now. We don't have to hide and lock everything up. We feel comfortable, you're a year and a half in. We think that you're finally in a place where, you're not going to go and, sneak off with a bottle of vodka or whiskey and be chugging in and come back in, ruin the holidays.
Yeah.
So
I remember I'd go home and visit on holidays when I could and stuff, and so I'd fly in. And I remember the first time my stepdad flipped me the keys or whatever to use their. I'm like, what's this? He's like, well, I figured you want to go to the gym or whatever you want to do. I'm like, you're gonna let me drive your car? And they're like, yeah, like we think you're ready. And I was like, oh. It felt like it was the first time I ever drove a car. Like, you know what I mean? It was a very, very surreal moment. Yeah. What would you say is the most valuable lesson that you've learned in all this experience?
I think most valuable one would be, a reoccurring theme I keep talking about is patience. Like it's just in my, when I was an addict, I needed that instant gratification. And so if I wanted it right then and there, and nothing was going to stop me until I got it.
Right.
Now instead of just seeing the next 5 feet in front of me, or the next 5 minutes, I can see the next 5 years, the next 10 years.
Right.
I have a goal. I have, things I still want to do with my life. And it's just, having patience with myself, having patience, again, like what you just brought up with your family about, them. We're a lot more okay with ourselves than our family initially is. So in early recovery, that was something I always had to remember. Yeah, man, it's just the process of being patient, and not only patient but kind with myself.
Right.
I had this mentality that I was always just going to be a junkie and a criminal, and so it took me a long time to shift my focus out of thinking like I am more than who I was in the past, and sometimes even out of this day, you ever hear of imposter syndrome? I'm kind of sitting around, and, purchase a truck, bought a home, I'm making decisions in the company I work for, and I'm just like, who am I?
Yeah.
What is this even real? Like,
Right.
Do they know who I am? But I have to remind myself, like I've worked to where to get where I am now, and it's been a blessing.
Right. It's a real thing, dude. And I think it doesn't matter if you're recovering or not. I think a lot of people go through that imposter syndrome because there's still a piece of me. It's like, I don't deserve all this good things happening to me. You being a bigger gentleman, backwards hat, just like me, all that. Do you find that people are people intimidated when they first come in contact with you, or when they talk to you?
I would say, I've talked to people, especially at my job, who they'll see me from a distance and they'll be like, oh, I don't really want to talk to that guy. But then I sit down and I kind of explain to them, I was that same person where you're at, not that long ago. And,
Right.
I am aware of how I can come off, so I try to do everything in my power to, mitigate a lot of the fears that someone might have towards a larger, individual like myself and you.
Right. I remember the one time I was running, and we're on a trail. There's tons of people, and I'm very aware. I'm tatted up and all this stuff, and I'm running, and some woman heard me running, and she's facing the same way or whatever, and she clutched her purse. I was like, lady, I'm out here running. And so I think, that was a very telling moment or whatever, but it's funny. I think we're very similar in this way. It's like you can judge a book by its cover. You can see tattoos or a big dude or a backwards hat or something like that, and you automatically assume you know this person. And it's funny because I'll watch as I open my mouth and I start to talk, and then people are like, oh, wait a minute.
Disarms him.
Oh, wait a minute. Like, he's not what I thought he was. You know what I mean? So it's, I was curious if you had that same experience.
I just recently had a friend recently reach out to me and tell me, she goes, hey, I don't want you to take this the wrong way. She goes, but I never got to tell you. She goes, do you remember when, you went out with me and my husband to the bar that one time? And I was just like, yeah. And she goes, well, he told me, and don't be offended, but he told me, he goes, wow, he's not, a big dumb guy like I thought he was.
Dude, you're a computer genius. You're probably one of the smartest dudes I know. I call you constantly to get information and stuff like that. So I would imagine you deal with some of that too. They're like, oh, it's just a big meathead or something like that. What with you and I vibe out on the gym stuff and all that, and I mess with you a lot of times because you'll go super hard for a while, and then it's like you kind of take a break, and then you'll go back super hard. And I've seen pictures of you at your peak and stuff like that. What got you to fall in love with the gym like you did? What got you to notice bodybuilding or want to get into it and make it a part of your life?
So in the 90s, my mother was a personal trainer growing up. So I was being brought to the gym. I think it was maybe 7 or 8 whenever I started going to the gym with her, especially in the summertime. Instead of putting me in daycare or something, she's like, they had a playroom at the gym. So she'd put me in there. And there was a big glass window, and I would always look out and just see these monsters, just walking around and be like, I want to be like that one day. And then the second part of it was you had to be at least 14 years old to work out. So there was about 5 years worth of time where it's like I wanted to work out so bad.
Oh, and you couldn't.
Yeah, I couldn't. Right. So them telling me I couldn't do it, yeah.
Right.
And so by the time I turned 14, I really started, I'd started playing football, started, doing athletics in high school freshman year and all that. But it was one of those things where it's like, especially when you're 14, you're going through puberty, all these changes, like you actively see almost day-to-day changes in your own body. And that's kind of what got me addicted to working out, was just seeing how far I could push this. Mm-hmm. And then, I'll go through periods where life gets in the way and I have to, take a break from the gym. But also that works in my favor because by giving me those breaks, it's fun, or what is it? What's the saying?
Absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah. It's kind of like one of those things. So by the time I'm ready to get back in the gym, like I'm hungry for it. I want to be there, almost every day, whether it's early morning, late night, more than so late night.
Right. You can't get you to be there in the morning.
Yeah, but I'll go in, after working a full day, I'll go in at 9, 10 o'clock at night and get what I need to get done. And, my diet changes and, it's always been a hobby, just one hobby I can always fall back on and feel safe doing,
Right.
If I'd lost everything else, in my life, I still had the gym. And so, even when I was in jail, that was one of the things you could always do was just, work out. Yeah. So it helps take your mind off of everything. It gets rid of the stress. It makes you sleep better. It's just, it's also one of the saving graces in my life.
Yeah, it's the best mental health medication I've ever had. Yeah. It bothers me a lot when I was getting out of the military and I'm diagnosed with, they diagnosed me with PTSD, depression, anxiety disorder, panic disorder, agoraphobia, laundry list of shit. And, the answer at the time was they kind of just handed me 12 bottles of pills and sent me on my way. And it never did what it needed to do. It was always a Band-Aid. And what I get out of the working out aspect, just in that term alone is, it's hard to even describe in the words what it's done for my mental health and everything else. And then all the other added benefits, like I go have a good hard workout that day, so now that makes me want to eat healthier, so I'm going to pass on the ice cream that night, or, so many other benefits. And I don't think people understand, I'll say it right now, what got me into running in the first place and kept me away from the gym for the longest time was the fact I was afraid to go in there and feel like I looked stupid. I thought everybody was going to look at me. Everybody was going to say I wasn't an expert. I didn't know what I was doing. And then, one thing luckily led to another to where I just got put in a position where I was like, all right, I'm going to go figure this out. And thank God I did. And then, I think most people are, if they can get over that first hump, if they can get over the decision to go, and then you go and you explore and you start learning, I see people either stop themselves before they get to that point, or they're too afraid to go in there and look dumb, and so they might stick to like 2 or 3 machines, and they go do the same 2 or 3 machines every time they go in there, and then they get bored of it after 2 weeks and they don't get back. Yeah. And so, you know, one thing I hope people in gym culture understand, like if you see somebody in the gym, like I'm honored anytime somebody comes up, random stranger comes up to me in the gym and asks me what exercise I'm doing, or what is that, what muscle is that hitting right there. Like I love being able to explain it. I don't ever want to be the dickhead that's just going up trying to correct people or tell them what they're doing. But when somebody, you know, I'm sure it's scary going up to somebody in the gym that looks like they know what they're doing or whatever, but they come up and they ask me, it's like, I think most people are like that are avid gym goers. It's like, you're in the right place, man. Come ask me if you need some help. So
I love it whenever, you know, younger teenagers or something will come and be like, how do I get arms like that? Or what do you do? You know, and I'm just like, huh. Right. You feel comfortable? Right. You want to look like me? Right. Oh my God! All right.
There's a guy that goes to my gym, and he's in there every morning with his son, and I'm just like, and his son's probably 6th or 7th grade, and it's like, damn, man, I wish I had somebody doing that, like that brought me there and taught me then. Like, I mean, I learned when I was in my late 30s, and I've chatted with the guy and the kid, and I've just been like, dude, that's a good dad right there. You don't understand what he's doing for you right there.
Yeah.
So. That's great. What, you know, people have heard some of your story. I'm sure there's people out there who have similar experiences. So somebody out there, you know, they're listening to this right now and they're suffering. They're going through it. What's your advice to them?
Don't give up. I mean, you know, for the longest time, it may seem like there's nowhere else to go in life, or you've exhausted all your options, but just don't keep going. You know, everyone has another relapse left in them, but not everybody has that last time to get sober. And it's, you know, a lot of times where I just thought, what is the point of all this? What am I really doing? And I had that little voice in the back of my head that said, just keep going, just keep going. It gets better. It'll get better. And, you know, I'm glad I listened to it, because, you know, the life I have now to where I was at 6 years ago, I mean, you know, I was homeless, addicted to drugs, no money, family wanted nothing to do with me. And it takes a lot of, you know, personal growth to realize, like, there's a common denominator in all this. Be like, I can't keep blaming other people or situations or whatever for all my problems. The common denominator of my problems is me. And so the only way for my problems to, you know, stop is for me to actively work towards changing them.
Right. Absolutely. Who would you say are your inspirations?
My parents, definitely. You know, immediate family-wise, both my parents. My dad's one of the hardest working men that I know. You know, worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs growing up, so my mom wouldn't have to work, because my mom, you know, wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, especially when we were little. She didn't want her babies, you know, being raised by someone else in daycare. So my dad made a lot of sacrifices to make that happen. You know, I always look to them. You know, they just celebrated 41 years of marriage 3 days ago. So yeah, it's I always look to them.
Congratulations, Mom and Dad.
So I've kind of looked at them towards what a healthy, you know, and successful marriage and relationship looks like. Because I can count on one hand how many times I've really seen them kind of yell at each other. They've yelled at me plenty. So that's
right.
But, you know, I strive, you know, I strive to take the lessons that they've taught me and apply them to my own life. And for the longest time, I ignored that. And I got, you know, nothing for it. Yeah, I mean, now if we're talking on a celebrity level or something like that, I mean, you got to go with Arnold. Arnold, you know, poor Austrian kid, moved over here, didn't even know English, and now he ended up being a huge movie star and, you know, governor of California. And, you know, I mean, that's just the American success story right there. You know, immigrant moves here, makes something of himself, and, you know, marries a Kennedy. So,
right. What did you watch the new documentary, the Arnold documentary on Netflix?
I have not
You haven't seen it yet?
No, not yet.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I won't give anything.
But I mean, I don't know what's in the documentary. I've watched every piece of media that has
Right.
come with Arnold for the past 50 years.
If you watched Pumping Iron, and I mean you've followed him, very braggadocious, very confident and stuff like that. The one part, and it's not giving anything away, but you see a vulnerable side to him in this, and he talks about his insecurities and stuff like that. And it's, I think so many of us that go to the gym, I think other people might see you, we look at Arnold and I'm like, oh, the dude's perfect or whatever like that. But then to hear him think that he was so far from it, that he had a small chest, or he had this and that. Yeah. And so it's crazy to think somebody of his stature would ever have that. So of course, every other person that's not famous or going through it, of course they have the exact same thing. So I've watched you work your way completely up the ladder of your company. It's been awesome to watch. I watched as you started off working in the detox. You work with a local treatment center in Austin, Texas called Recovery Unplugged. Yep. What else? What are you working on there? What are you working on personally?
At work, we just opened up a new trauma-based therapy program. It's like a 30-day program, and we deal with all sorts of trauma, whether it's PTSD, with combat veterans, any kind of sexual assault trauma with anyone that's been in the sex trafficking industry, individuals who have had traumatic experiences in their childhood. We've opened that up. We've got all the beds filled up. It's so far running great, but just to expand a little bit, it's Recovery Unplugged, music-based treatment center. The only one of its kind really in the nation. We're in network with almost all providers, but yeah, I mean, we're just trying to help as many people as possible. We also open up a virtual IOP program. So if you need help online, you can't come into the treatment center, we got you. So
that's good. What are you working on personally? What's Brandon's next goal?
Well, me and my wife are trying to have a baby. So that's the
big
next
one.
big thing. Yeah, we figure we got the house, we got the 2 dogs, the car. So now next step is having a child.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Good stuff. All right, I want to play a little quick game with you. Not really a game, but I'm going to throw out I'm going to throw out a couple different words. I just want you to pick one.
Okay.
All right. So first one: mornings or nights?
Nights.
Night person. Jordan or LeBron?
Jordan.
Let's go. All right. Chicken or steak?
Steak.
Steak. DC or Marvel?
I have to go with Marvel.
Really?
I mean, I'm a huge Incredible Hulk fan.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But then again, I mean, Batman's good too.
I didn't know you were into Disney movies. That's all right.
No.
No. All right. Fridays or Saturdays?
Saturdays.
Saturdays?
Yeah, for sure.
I like Fridays for some reason because I like that going to bed. It's like, oh, I have the whole weekend ahead of me. But
Fridays are when all the, shit goes down at work. Fridays are very rough. It's everybody knows the weekend's coming, so everybody wants to act up and everything. So Saturdays are my day of, just chilling at the house, getting the lawn work done, staying home cooking food. Like that's my sanctuary.
Right. All right. Biden or Trump?
Trump.
Nobody's allowed to get mad. That's what makes this country great, is that everybody can have their own beliefs, their own personalities. They're not guilty because they just don't think the same thing as you are. So
Biden or Trump?
Neither.
Okay.
Neither.
What if you had to?
Trump, because he's funny. Because he's funny. Yeah, I don't want to get myself in trouble.
Yeah, no, don't.
We're gonna get canceled before we even start. All right, here's a good one. Traps or abs?
Traps.
Let's go. We are the same line. All right. Mobb Deep or Outkast?
I respect Mobb Deep more, but I listened to way more Outkast growing up.
Okay. Is it because you're from the South?
Yeah.
Did you see they just got...
They just got #1 hip hop group of all time.
Come on.
I want to argue against it.
Over Wu-Tang?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good.
I mean, I don't know that there's ever been a more influential group than Wu-Tang.
NWA would probably be. They brought it to the forefront.
They definitely played their part. They're pioneers and stuff. But as far as I don't know, man, Wu-Tang was. I don't know. I was surprised
They're
they had.
Northeast, so that's like, that's their territory.
I'm for sure picking Mobb Deep, but I respect Outkast. All right, I think I know the answer to this one. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
For sure. All right, last one. Vax or no vax?
I'm not vaccinated. So.
All right. I know. Did you listen to the? Did you listen to Robert Kennedy on Rogan?
Yep, I did.
What did you think?
Just on him as a person, or
Just everything he put out.
I mean, I do like some of his his talking points, but at the same time, I got to remember he's a Kennedy, and there's no other family in the United States besides like the Bushes and Clintons that's more like deep state than the Kennedys. So I always wonder with politicians what their ulterior motive is. Like you're saying everything we want to hear, but when the rubber hits the road, what are you actually going to do?
Right.
And I just think he's going to be more of the same. So.
Right. You guys probably don't know this, but Brandon and I enjoy a good conspiracy theory here and there. Very entertaining to us. So that's a lot of our topics, conversation. Sometimes I was curious what you thought about it, dude. If somebody wants to follow you, somebody wants to get a hold of you, where can they do that at? If you don't want to give anything out, you don't have to.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty private.
All right.
I don't want to. Yeah.
All right, cool. Hopefully, wherever this comes out, you can comment below if you got a question for Brandon. I'll try to make sure it gets in front of him. Dude, I want to thank you for coming on. It was fucking awesome. I appreciate your story, dude.
Thank you.
So I'd like to do a little thing with you if I could. The podcast is I Am Redemption. It's a powerful word. It grabs you. And so, who's Brandon?
I'm a father. I'm a son. I'm an addict. I'm recovered. And I'm a husband.
There you go. That's good. I'm sure your lovely wife will be
Yep.
happy you ended it with
had to
that
include
one.
that one. Yep.
Make sure you didn't get in trouble.
Yep.
All right, brother. I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Appreciate you.